Welcome to episode 84 of the Forward from 50 podcast, where we interview people over 50 who are pursuing new direction for their lives. It's an opportunity for men and women to tell their stories, their way, and in their own words. I'm Greg Gerber, the founder of Forward from 50, and your host for today's show. I have a fun interview with you this week with a man who has survived 2 brain surgeries and a divorce. Through it all, he demonstrated tremendous resiliency. Today, Jeffrey Barnes teaches people about the wisdom displayed by Walt Disney. He and his wife Lindsey, who is 38 years younger than he is, also teach people how to make an age gap marriage work. Jeffrey grew up in the Panhandle of Florida, where he visited Disney World in Orlando many times. However, in 1988, he made his first trip to Disneyland in Anaheim, California. That experience opened his eyes to what a remarkable man Walt Disney really was. Jeffrey started researching Walt's amazing life and his resiliency to push through setbacks, discouragement, and ridicule to make his dreams come true. He learned Walt Disney had far more failures than he did successes. Walt didn't open Disneyland until he was 53 years old himself, yet his vision revolutionized the amusement park industry in many ways. Jeffrey spent his career in higher education. When he was in his early 50s, he finally assembled all his research into a book titled The Wisdom of Walt. Today, Jeffrey travels around the country teaching people about Walt Disney's approach to life and business. To tell us how he endured setbacks himself to live a dream life today, please welcome Jeffrey Barnes to the show. Thanks for joining me today, Jeff. I really appreciate the time. When did you first become interested in Walt Disney?
Oh, first of all, thank you for having me. I can't remember, maybe because it's been so long, maybe because at 61, you don't remember everything like you used to. I don't know that I remember a time that I wasn't interested, at least in the Disney parks, but I became especially fascinated after I went to Disneyland for the first time, which was in August of 88, had a miserable experience. And fortunately stayed in California long enough to realize, even more than Florida, the people in California really mean something. And so I was curious, what did I miss? And I started doing research. Curiosity is free, right?
Correct.
I got curious. I started doing research and discovered Walt is very much like you and me. Wasn't born successful, difficult childhood, difficult relationship with his father, more failures than successes. And once I discovered that, it became a passion and an obsession.
Did you grow up in California?
No, I actually grew up in the Panhandle of Florida.
Okay.
So my first trip to a Disney park was 50 years ago this year, Walt Disney World's Magic Kingdom, August of 74. And I loved it. And from then all the way through high school, if there was a reason for us to be going back to Disney World, I was always the most excited. I was always the one figuring out what we should do and where were the best places to go. But I went to college in Southern Mississippi, grad school in California, and didn't get to Disneyland until August of 88, and was transposing my Walt Disney World experience, transposing my childhood memories onto Walt's original park. And it didn't meet or measure my expectations, which was part of the disappointment.
There is a difference between the two parks because Walt had his vision for Disneyland and he opened it when he was older than 50, right? I think he was 53.
Walt Disney was 53 years old the day Disneyland opened.
Okay. It was his vision and it revolutionized the entertainment and the park industry in that regard. But I think he felt it was incomplete. And that's why he envisioned an even better experience through Disney World. Am I correct?
100%. So when the park opened, they built it in exactly a year. They broke ground July of 54. It opened July of 55. It was incomplete the day that it opened, which prompted Walt's response, as long as there's imagination left in the world, Disneyland will never be finished. Which is interesting because Walt was a starter, not so much a finisher. He got bored quickly. He hated sequels. And so as early as 1959, even though he had gone on record to say there'll never be another Disneyland, he was already looking for an East Coast version of the happiest place on earth, not so he could do another Disneyland. By this point, he was really interested in urban planning. And so the original vision for Walt Disney World wasn't Magic Kingdom, although they were going to do that because it was going to be a revenue generator. He was really interested in Epcot, not the theme park, but the experimental prototype community of tomorrow. And Walt never stopped. Walt never settled. He never just repeated what he had always been doing. Walt was consistently growing, consistently changing, consistently evolving. And he saw his dreams come true as a result.
That's a great story because it's a good example for the rest of us to follow. Did you ever work for Disney, the
No,
corporation?
I
No?
have not. My dream job would be to work as a tour guide at Disneyland. Uh, Now I get to be a tour guide. People will ask us for individual or private tours. But I think more importantly, because I see the parks not just as an escape, but as an example, and I don't necessarily see Disney as the place where dreams come true. I see it as the place that can show you how to make your own dreams come true. I see myself as a tour guide through your Disney experience and an opportunity to grow, change, evolve, and again, see your own dreams come true.
What do you admire most about Walt Disney?
His resiliency. His wife, Lily, said, I've never seen Walt beaten at anything. So again, impoverished childhood, difficult relationship with his dad, bankrupt with his first studio at the ripe old age of 21, loses his first successful cartoon character, which was not Mickey Mouse, but Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. No one believes in Snow White. No one believes in Disneyland. And Walt didn't care. Walt believed in it. And I think one of our challenges is we spend a lot of time in life trying to convince other people that we know what we're doing and get them to buy in, get them to believe in who we are and what we're doing. That's the wrong approach. Walt only convinced people that he believed in what he was doing. And that was infectious. So don't try to get anyone to believe in what you're doing. Just convince them that you believe and keep moving in that direction.
That's good. It opens up a whole bunch of doors, I would imagine.
Absolutely. And the other thing that I think is really interesting about Walt is he wasn't particularly gifted or talented. He was an okay animator. The success of Mickey Mouse really belongs to Ub Iwerks. He was a horrific businessman. That success really belongs to his brother Roy. And the only attraction single-handedly designed by Walt Disney himself is Tom Sawyer Island. He was an amazing human resource manager. He hired well, he trained well, he let his people go. And as a result, those people went further and Walt went further because of that vision and that contagious passion, that contagious belief.
Walt, like me, is a dodo, a dad of daughters only. He had 2 daughters, and I have 3 daughters. Read any book about him, and he just praises those girls all the time.
Gosh.
Yep.
Yeah. In fact, the idea for Disneyland started in the 1940s when every Saturday in the Disney household, that was Daddy's Day. And Walt would take off with Diane and Sharon. And here in Southern California, they had lots of options. They could go to the beach, they could go to mountains, they could go to museums. But their favorite place to go was a little merry-go-round in nearby Griffith Park. And Diane and Sharon, this because you've got daughters, would ride the merry-go-round over and over and over again. And Walt was stuck sitting on this bench eating peanuts. And it was on the bench that he had an idea and he began to dream of a different kind of place, a place where parents and children could actually have fun together. People don't realize this. When Disneyland opened in 1955, there were more than 2,000 amusement parks in the United States. We didn't necessarily need another one. But Walt didn't do another amusement park. He disrupted the industry, creating a theme park, a park that told stories. And he made sure it was better than anything else that currently existed. Walt was a disruptor.
That's correct, because back then the theme parks were not necessarily clean and they weren't necessarily maintained well. and the employees were grungy. And he changed all of
Yes,
that and made it
absolutely.
a
And
destination.
that's part of the reason why his wife, Lily, and his brother, Roy, wanted nothing to do with building an amusement park. But Walt believed in his idea, and he eventually got everyone else to believe as well. So, for example, even though Roy called the banks up and said, if Walt comes down there to talk to you about that damn amusement park, I need to know about it. But on the first day, the first person to spend the first $1 to purchase the first ticket to get into Disneyland was, guess who? Walt's older brother, Roy.
Oh,
So again, because Walt believed, Roy and everybody else eventually came along.
you had touched on this earlier, but I think it's worth expanding on. When Walt started Disneyland in his early 50s, a lot of people said he was starting from a position of success, but he really wasn't. What was he?
No, Walt again had more failures than successes, to include a bankruptcy, to include losing his first successful cartoon character. And when Disneyland opened in 1953, nobody believed in it. It's been said Walt did not have a friend in the world when he was building Disneyland. Lily was out, Roy was out, and there was a point about halfway through construction. One Sunday afternoon, Walt grabs one of the Imagineers and takes them out to the construction site. And it's just bulldozers and piles of dirt, a few trees. And Walt says to him, half the money's gone, half the time is gone. There's nothing here that I would charge a single person 5 cents to see. I'm scared. But Walt got up the next day and kept moving forward.
Oh, that's neat.
So if you're scared today, and a lot of us have a lot of reasons to be scared, that's okay. Get up tomorrow, keep moving forward.
Was Walt more successful later in life than he was in the early part of his life?
Yes. So Walt was never really financially secure until Disneyland opened. He had to sell a home to get the money for Disneyland. He had to cash in his life insurance to get the money for Disneyland. The budget for the park was $3.5 to $4 million. Somehow he had managed to spend well over $17 million when the gates finally opened. But Disneyland really turned his financial fortunes around. And we're coming up on the 50th anniversary of the release of Mary Poppins is the only project Walt Disney ever did that everybody was on board with and everybody agreed with. And it scared him to death. He didn't know what to do with it because he was used to always having resistance. He was used to always having to confront conflict and people who didn't understand, people who didn't agree, people who didn't believe.
That's an interesting perspective because when Mary Poppins was made, the author of the book was not fully on board with Walt's plan for adding animation to that movie. Disney had
Not at
released
all.
another movie about that. I can't remember what.
Yeah, Saving Mr. Banks.
That's it. Yes. Yep.
Yep. Wonderful, wonderful film. Yeah, the original author of Mary Poppins did not want to give the rights away to Walt, but eventually she agreed. And everyone involved in the project was like, oh my gosh, this is going to be amazing. And it was. But Walt was so used to people not seeing his vision that he almost didn't know what to do with the support he had from Mary Poppins.
He ignored the other people who didn't see his vision. And maybe he listened to them for constructive criticism, but he did not let them derail his dream. Yeah, super. You wrote a book called The Wisdom of Walt. What prompted you to do that?
Ooh, great question. So on my second trip to Disneyland, after I had done the research on Walt and the research on the park, I saw it from a completely different perspective. And I walked away mesmerized. And I can remember saying to people in June of 1991, I'm going to write a book on Disneyland one day. Now, I had no idea what I meant by that. And of course, I had no idea how to do it. And it took 25 years for that to finally come to fruition. And part of it was, woe is me. Part of it was, who am I? Part of it was, it'll never work. And then in 2014, after I had moved to Southern California and had started teaching a college level course on the history of Disneyland, which, if I'm honest with you, Greg, I was really teaching as a way of doing the book without having to do the book. I knew how to teach. I was in higher ed for 22 years. So doing a course was easy for me. Writing a book, not so much. And the day after I gave the first lecture, the first semester teaching a college course on the history of Disneyland, I was diagnosed with a life-threatening brain tumor. And the neurosurgeon wanted to operate immediately. And because of the evasiveness of the surgery, I was going to be out of work for 2 months, which meant the class would have to be canceled. The class was never about going to Disneyland, riding a roller coaster, and getting an easy A. It was all about resiliency and perseverance and overcoming obstacles and what it truly takes to see your own dreams come true. If that were true, I couldn't bail on the students at the first adversity. I couldn't bail on the students at the first obstacle. And so I refused the surgery, taught the course, eventually had the surgery. It was successful. And on the other side, I'm like, you know what? Now that I've faced mortality, now that I've overcome this, I don't care that I don't know how to write a book. I don't care that I don't know how to get it published. I don't care if anybody buys it. I'm doing it regardless. And as a result, getting the brain tumor was the best thing that could have ever happened to me, because now, as a result of the success of the first book and the second one, I write and speak full time.
How old were you when you had to undergo that brain surgery?
I was 51.
So over 50 already. And
yes,
life taking you in a completely different direction.
Yep. And then I had a second one in 2020. Second brain tumor, second brain surgery.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. 2020 was a fun year for everybody, right?
No kidding. I still get triggered when I think about it.
Yeah.
You were in 22 years in higher education. Was it all at Wayland Baptist University?
So I served at Wayland Baptist University and at California Baptist University. And I ended my career at CBU. And that's where I taught the history of Disneyland class.
Okay. What prompted you to go into higher education?
Ooh, I don't know that anyone's ever asked me that question. I love teaching. I am a storyteller, and I love inspiring and motivating and teaching through the power of story. And like you and our listeners, you probably had not so good teachers in your educational journey. And I knew that the problem was, I mean, you could have someone with the most amount of information and the most amount of knowledge, but if they don't know how to tell stories, they're not going to connect with the kids. And so I had an opportunity to lead teams and lead students by getting into higher education. And I loved it. It was absolutely wonderful.
So growing up, you didn't dream of being a professor for your career?
I did not. However, I did dream of writing.
Okay.
And I was always very passionately interested in history and political science. So it's not a huge mystery that I ended up in those arenas.
So the wisdom of Walt is not only a book, but it's a business for you. What do you do for people?
It is. The books have given me a platform for speaking around the country and around the world. People ask all the time, how do you become a professional speaker? How do you have the opportunity to give keynotes? You have to be seen as an authority in something. And the word authority starts with author. And I've been very fortunate, very blessed. The books have done well. And I've been invited again to travel the country, travel the world, to speak to all kinds of audiences. So, for example, we just got home last night from Des Moines, Iowa, where I spoke at an insurance conference. 2 weeks ago, I was here in Southern California speaking to the executives at the Las Vegas Sphere.
What do you teach on when you're doing these conferences?
Primarily leadership lessons from, quote unquote, the happiest place on earth, and what we can learn from Walt Disney's life, what we can learn from Disneyland, what we can learn from Walt Disney World, because most people have a very positive association with Disney. It's a name that is known around the world. I don't want you to just consume it. I want you to connect with it in a way that helps you with your life, your business, your goals, your dreams, your story.
How many times a year do you speak at these kinds of conferences?
Oh, 3 or 4 times a month.
Wow. So
it keeps us busy.
I can imagine. Is it all over the world or primarily in the United States?
Primarily in the United States. We do fortunately get to go globally. So I've done quite a bit of work in Canada, the Caribbean, and South America.
Besides writing and speaking, you also publish a regular blog, I understand. What do you talk about in that?
My blog comes out every Wednesday morning, and it's titled Wednesdays with Walt, with the WED in Wednesday being all caps. Because before we had Imagineering, Walt started Disneyland with a group of Imagineers in a company called WED, stands for Walter Elias Disney. And the weekly blog is an opportunity for me to continue writing, continue sharing stories, continue making applications to people's life and their own leadership journey on a weekly basis without having to have it all connected and compiled in a book with a start, middle, and ending.
I'm listening to your audiobook right now, and I loved how you started it by talking about how Walt came up with his ideas by sitting on a bench. How important is it for people who are struggling with what to do with their life to just sit down at a bench and think?
If there's one thing that I think is missing in our world today, it's the ability to sit and do nothing. I think about Walt on that bench back in the 1940s with his daughters on the merry-go-round, and all he has is a bag of peanuts. Now, if that were to happen today, we'd be on our phone, right? We'd be doom scrolling on social media. We'd be texting, and we're just constantly distracted. And as a result of those distractions, we don't tap into our ideas. We don't tap into our crazy thoughts. We don't give ourselves room to dream. And one of the biggest encouragements is to find the white space in your life, leave the phone behind, sit on a park bench and do absolutely nothing, even if it's just for 10 minutes.
Really, that's so hard for me to do. Absolutely nothing. I could sit there for 3 minutes and it feels like 30. It's just crazy to do that,
Yeah,
but very
because
important.
we've been hardwired to have these dopamine hits,
Yes.
and we need to detox from them, or otherwise you're just going to keep living the same life in the same day over and over again. You've got to create that white space. And the way you do it is by getting rid of the distractions and having the courage to just sit and think about it like this. Walt most wanted to be remembered as a storyteller. He didn't want to be remembered for Mickey Mouse. He didn't want to be remembered for Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. He didn't even want to be remembered for Disneyland. He wanted to be remembered as a storyteller. And he built Disneyland for what purpose? For the purpose of telling stories. The challenge was he was accustomed to telling stories in a soundstage in Hollywood. Well, now he's in an outdoor environment, 160 acres in an orange grove in Anaheim, California. How's he going to get that control back? When they dredged out the rivers of America in Frontierland, they ended up with 350 tons of dirt. They dumped the dirt around the perimeter of the park, which allowed them to keep the Magic Kingdom in, the distractions of the outside world out. We need our berm.
Hmm.
We need the ability to lock in on our thoughts, lock in on our ideas, lock in on our goals, lock in on our dreams, and keep the distractions out. So build a berm and do it for at least 10 minutes every single day.
The silence is so important to be able to block out the worries of the world. There's been so much stress and anger and confusion in the world in the last 4 to 5 years that having that
Absolutely.
silence, I would think, would be good for mental health, not only for idea generation.
Correct. 100%.
Have you ever been to Walt's boyhood home in Missouri?
Multiple times. I've been very fortunate. I've been able to visit Marceline. 3 years ago, I gave a lecture at the hometown museum there. I didn't realize that Marceline is only 134 miles from Des Moines. And if I had realized that, I probably would have gone for another visit when we were in Iowa this week.
I've been there 3 years ago, is during the COVID pandemic. The museum happened to be closed
Mhm.
on the day that I was there, but
Oh,
I
no.
loved the city because it was so inspirational to him. You talked about the park bench that he was thinking at when he was with his daughters in the merry-go-round, but he also had a tree that he liked to sit at.
Dreaming tree.
And
Yes.
yes, and do the exact same thing. So it's a trait that he carried out through his entire life.
It is. And Marceline, Walt would go on to say, the most important anything that ever happened to me in my life happened to me in Marceline. He was born in Chicago, and at age 4, the family moves to Marceline, and Walt loved it. He loved the farm, loved the town, loved his dreaming tree. And then unfortunately, the farm failed, and Walt had to move to Kansas City when he was 9. Broke the little boy's heart, so much so that when he was designing Disneyland and he insisted on a single entrance in and a single exit out, which every amusement park designer back in the 50s hated. They said that's never going to work. It wasn't just a single entrance in and a single exit out, but it was also Walt being vulnerable, which means to lean into the wound. Walt was leaning into the wound of losing Marceline. And so he models Main Street after that little town in northern Missouri.
That is a cool story. And it really is. When you look at Main Street Marceline, you can see how it influenced
absolutely.
The whole Disney park,
Yep.
the Main Street Disney. Walt created Imagineers. He's the first guy to develop that. I think that the lesson that he gave us is that it is important to dream and just imagine what if, without immediately shooting down the ideas as it'll never work. What do you think about that?
So again, Walt was an amazing human resource director, and it starts out with WED, and he took people from the studio. And I think John Hinch said it best. John Hinch was probably Walt's favorite Imagineer, but John Hinch is working at the studio one day, and Walt taps him on the shoulder and said, I want you to work on Disneyland, and you're going to like it. And so he gets this group of people, separates them from the studio, and it becomes the sandbox. It becomes his blue sky, if you will. And Walt loved it because he was literally getting to create a world that had existed in his head for more than 20 years. And the Imagineers who had the opportunity to work alongside Walt, they loved it too, because they could see the passion, they could see the vision, they could see how obsessed Walt was in endeavoring to create the most perfect place in the world.
I think it's also a lesson for sharing your good ideas with people who will encourage and nourish those rather than shoot them down all the time.
Exactly. And Walt was very intentional about getting people who were interested in, like he was, in making the world a better place. I get asked a lot, how does Disney do it? Like, why are their cast members like so amazing and so phenomenal? And they think it's complicated. It's actually very simple, not necessarily easy, but very simple. Walt hired a fellow by the name of Van Arsdale France to do the very first cast member training. And Van Arsdale France would go on to create what's known today as Disney University. All Walt said to Van was, I'm building the happiest place on earth. Please hire happy people. And so Walt wanted to make sure that everyone who was hired was a good cultural fit. And from there, he could train them to do anything. You can't train for attitude.
What do you think Walt would say about the Disney Corporation today?
First of all, because everyone, to include his own wife and his own brother, thought the park would be closed, bankrupt, and shuttered in 6 months or less, he would A, be thrilled that it's thriving, be thrilled that Walt Disney World, when they shut down for a day as a result of a hurricane, they lose like $80 million a day. And today, as a result of the global parks, the sun never sets on a Disney park anywhere in the world. So he would be absolutely thrilled. Now, having said that, there are things that the company does today that I don't think Walt would agree with. I don't think Walt would be 100% on board with. But to be fair, that's why he did Disneyland. Walt hated the studio after it went public and became a company traded on the stock exchange. And so today, unfortunately, Disney does a lot of things based on stock value And Walt never liked that. Walt never agreed with that. And so there are parts of it he would be thrilled with, and there are parts that he would hate.
What do you think his take would be on using artificial intelligence?
So that's a fascinating question. What's the definition of technology, Greg?
Using technology to do things to make it easier for humans to do things.
Yeah. How many times do we embrace technology on any given day and it does anything but make that easier, right?
Exactly. That's right.
Technology is anything invented or created after you were born.
Okay.
So it's a sliding scale. Walt always embraced technology. He embraced it with sound in Steamboat Willie. He embraced it with the multiplane camera in Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And he partnered with television, which was the emerging technology in the 1950s. He partnered with television to help make Disneyland happy. Not happy, help make Disneyland happen. And so Walt always partnered with technology. He leveraged technology, but he used it as a tool. Technology never drove the story. Walt would figure out a way to partner with AI. He would figure out a way to leverage AI, but it would not become an AI driven company. And it's a part of the reflection of Walt had one foot in Main Street, which was a town from the turn of the century, and another foot in the future, i.e. Tomorrowland.
That's right. Yeah, so you think he would utilize the technology today to make films and
Absolutely.
things like that? I do too.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Your life is always changing as well. In fact, a couple of
Whose isn't?
a couple of years ago, it went in an entirely different direction. You started over in a marriage relationship. What happened, or how
I
did that
did.
come about?
So going back to 2020, which again was not a great year for anyone, I had to deal with the pandemic. I had to deal with a second brain tumor, second surgery. And while recovering, discovered that my wife had been having an extra relationship for more than 7 years. And so that ended. Very difficult time for me. And I think to some degree led to me deciding to go all in on writing and speaking full time, because now I was living on my own. It was just me. If this didn't work, I was the only person that would suffer the consequences. I was the only one who had to figure any of this out. And then after my final semester in higher education, a former student reached out to me on Christmas Day. I was having some medical challenges and she found out I was in the hospital, and she reached out to me and we kept texting and kept connecting, and she offered to come over and help. And despite a massive age gap, we have a ton in common, to include loving to go to Disneyland, loving baseball, loving music. We became really fast and great friends. And we got married a year ago, December.
You talk about an age gap. Explain what the age gap is for you folks.
So I'm 61 and Lindsey is 22.
That is an age.
Weird as having a medieval castle at the end of a Main Street, USA, right? You have tons of main streets in the United States. You don't have any medieval castles at the end, but that's okay. Weird sometimes works. And we are the first to say, probably wouldn't work for everyone, might not work for you, and that's okay. Works wonderfully for us.
Mm-hmm. When you're equally yoked spiritually, financially, on all of the major, usually the big issues that marriages encounter, I would imagine that it would work for anybody.
Absolutely. I can remember we had been texting back and forth for about 3 weeks. So in January of 2022, she shared with me over text that not only was she a huge baseball fan, which you don't see in the younger generation these days, but that she was a baseball fan and loved listening to games over the radio. And I can remember reading that text and instantly thinking, I'm going to end up marrying this girl.
Because you like
And now here we are.
Because you like baseball so much? Or
I love baseball and I strongly prefer to listen to it on the radio. So again, they say opposites attract, and that's true, but opposites don't necessarily make the best companions long term.
Mm-hmm.
And, for Lindsey and I, despite the age gap, we have far more in common than we do in things that we might disagree in or might not concur on.
How did your friends and family react to the relationship?
A great question. I think initially there were concerns that this had been going on while I was at the university and she was a student in my final class, which was 100% not true. And once we were able to clear up any misconceptions around that, the vast majority of people were, oh, that's great. Or we spent 30 seconds around you guys and it works. It's absolutely wonderful. Her mom was easily our biggest advocates at the very beginning. And she did a lot of the heavy lifting in convincing the rest of Lindsay's family that I was okay and I had Lindsay's best interests at heart. And while the concerns were legitimate, they didn't really have any need to worry.
You had worked for a Baptist university. Is faith an important aspect of your life?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I was pastoring churches in southern Mississippi at age 22.
I didn't know you were a pastor as well. My goodness.
Yes. And the joke that I always make is I went from inspiring and motivating based on the kingdom to now inspiring and motivating based on the magic kingdom.
Okay.
But the foundational interests remain the same. And that is wanting to see people be successful, wanting to see people live their best life, and wanting to tell stories.
If you had to start over again, is there anything you'd do differently?
I don't think so, Greg.
Okay.
And the reason why I say that is I believe everybody is exactly where they should be at any given moment. And every day is New Year's Day. You can always start over if you want to or if you need to. So I'll share another story. Ray Kroc, the founder of McDonald's, Ray Kroc and Walt Disney were friends together, serving in the same ambulance corps way back in France during World War I. And they stayed friends the rest of their life. When Walt was opening Disneyland at age 53 in 1955, Ray Kroc was still driving around with milkshake machines in the trunk of his car. Never too late.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And do you think Ray was inspired by Walt starting over so late in his life?
I think that certainly helped.
Mm-hmm.
I think he was certainly inspired by Walt's success, whether it was Mickey, Snow White, and now Disneyland. And if this guy can get into all of these different industries at different stages in his life, yeah, I can start what would become the model and world's largest fast food company.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any advice for people over 50 about identifying or pursuing their passion?
Yeah, believe in yourself and know the 8-year-old version of you still lives inside of you. Your subconscious does not know the difference. So get up every morning, make the decision to be happy, make the decision to be proactive, and ask yourself, what does the 8-year-old version of you want to do today? And go do that thing.
I like that. 8-year-old, because many of us come up with ideas or sense in our being early in life as children and teens that we should be doing something else. And we get discouraged by well-meaning friends and families to go do things more practical. So now that you're later in life, that's a great time to be embracing your 8-year-old self or your 18-year-old self.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. And there's a good side to everything. And if you're older, you probably are a little more free, and the freedom gives you a little more opportunity. Take advantage of it.
How can people connect with you if they want to touch base with you or get information about the Wisdom of Walt platform?
You can find me at thewisdomofwalt.com. And I would encourage at a minimum for people to sign up for the free Wednesdays with Walt blog. You'll get a story, inspiration, motivation, applicable tips every single Wednesday. Again, 100% free in your inbox. And if you're interested in getting a personally signed book, if you're interested in having me speak, give a keynote, lead a workshop, all of that, you can connect with me through thewisdomofwalt.com.
I understand that you and Lindsey have your own YouTube channel now.
And we do. You can find us at the Jeff and Lindsey Barnes on YouTube, or maybe just do a search Age Gap Couple on YouTube, and I'm sure we'll pop up there.
Mhm. What kinds of content are you producing for the YouTube channel?
So the YouTube channel really focuses on two different avenues. Either A, what we do on any given day. What does our life look like? And it includes a lot of video from Disneyland, Universal, baseball games, the travels and journeys that we take. But then secondly, and this tends to be the most popular, just real quick, here's what we're learning. Here's what we're experiencing as we grow in our relationship. And here's how we think that you could apply some of those same lessons to make your relationship better and strong.
I like that because it comes from two different perspectives, a rather younger perspective and a more mature and experienced perspective.
It does. And people are resonating with that quite a bit because, who you're married to matters, right?
Absolutely.
A lot of our success and a lot of our happiness is a byproduct of being with the right person, being with the right partner. The challenge, of course, Greg, is if you don't pay attention, everything in our world will eventually corrode. So, like, we've got plumbing challenges in our house this morning because the pipes are 75 years old. They've got to be replaced. You've got to do maintenance in your relationship. You've got to pay attention to what's working, do more of that. What isn't working, do less of that, and be very intentional about making that critical area of your life not just work, but be as magical as possible.
That's a great point because, like you and I had talked before we started the interview, many people over the age of 50, they are so busy with life and so busy with changing or with dealing with kids that they neglect each other. And then when the last child leaves the house, they look at each other and they discover that they're complete strangers sharing space in a house. And it's important to maintain that relationship the whole time. But then you also show that when a change like that takes place and people separate, that there is a possibility to start over with a new relationship. So thank you for sharing.
Absolutely. The best thing you could do for your children is to have a phenomenal relationship with your partner.
I agree.
That needs to be first. That needs to be number one priority. And if you're single and lonely and want to have a relationship, the number one thing you need to do is to have the mindset of, I'm not too old. It's not too late. I can have the relationship that I want, and start taking action to put yourself out there.
I love that, Jeff. I really do. Thank you so much for sharing your story with me today. And people can again connect with you at thewisdomofwalt.com. Thank you again for sharing your story, and I wish you the best of luck in 2025.
Thank you, Greg.
I've been a big fan of Walt Disney for many years myself, so I was intrigued by Jeffrey Barnes' desire to tell people about the man who revolutionized movie making and family entertainment in a way that endures today. Jeffrey's life has had multiple ups and downs in recent years. He had been in higher education for 22 years, where he taught religion classes and served in administration at Wayland Baptist University. However, during his first semester of teaching a course on the history of Disneyland, Jeffrey was diagnosed with a life-threatening brain tumor at the age of 51. Surviving that experience altered the trajectory of his life. Facing mortality, he decided to become a writer and public speaker. Life threw another curveball in 2020 when he developed a second brain tumor requiring surgery. Two brushes with death caused Jeffrey to realize how important it was for him to slow down, shut out distractions, and simply enjoy life, as well as to dream and think. His life took another turn after discovering his wife of many years had been having an affair for more than 7 years. After getting divorced, Jeffrey connected with a former student while he was in the hospital. He discovered he shared a number of interests with Lindsey, who was in her early 20s. In fact, they had more in common than they did things for which they may have disagreed. Their bond grew stronger to the point they were married in 2023. Today, Jeffrey and Lindsey operate their own YouTube channel exploring issues of being an age gap couple. Their channel can be found at www.youtube.com/@JeffandLindseyBarnes. People can connect with Jeffrey at www.thewisdomofwalt.com, where they can sign up for his free weekly newsletter titled Wednesdays with Walt. That's all I have for this week's show. If you'd like help in identifying a purpose for your life or to get help planning your next steps, I'm offering a complimentary brainstorming session to members of the Forward from 50 Facebook community. For details, connect with me on Facebook or visit www.forwardfrom50.com. I'll have another inspirational interview on the next episode of the Forward from 50 podcast. Thanks for listening, and if you like the show, please consider leaving a review wherever you download the episodes.